Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wizard and the Priestess. This is Nuala, and we are so excited to have you here today with us. I know I have been a bit MIA for a lot of the last few months, but I couldn't miss this opportunity because today we have a very, very special guest
to chat with me.
that is not Matt.
Oh, no, it's hard to
Other
imagine,
people to
but
talk
there
to.
are other
And
people
today
here.
we are very, very excited, or I am super excited because I have been kind of enwrapped with this guest that we are bringing on today for the last, I would say, maybe 4 or 5 months. And I am so excited to speak to her, or for her to speak to us. So without further ado, I think I hear a knock on the door.
I think I
Everyone,
hear a knock on the door. We haven't told her we're going
that's
straight
all
in,
right, you'll
so
figure it
we'll
out.
see how that goes.
Please welcome everyone,
Yeah.
Ola Wolny.
Oh, I don't think I timed that right.
Oh,
Hi, Ola.
hi. Hi guys.
Hi. I'm,
I pressed the button a second too late. That's all right. We're used to my tech
so
savviness.
everyone, this is Ola. Ola, we'd love if you could just introduce yourself and dive straight
Absolutely.
in.
Yeah, let's do it. Right, so Ola Wolny from Self Mastery Quest and mysticalarcticjourneys.com. By background, by my old Matrix days, oil and gas engineer that I got kicked out of. But that's
Nice.
kind of old days. I mean, I spent 15 years, I think, around 15 years in the industry, until Matrix couldn't digest me anymore. So that kind of pushed me into a different path, which I believe everything was pre-engineered anyway. So I started walking a totally different, much closer to the nature, much closer to the ancient ways, the old teachings, the wisdom of women of the old days that is still very much living in the mythology, in the indigenous wisdom, specifically here where I am, the north of Norway, the Arctic, the indigenous people of the north, their traditions, the shamanism that they, kind of in secret but still practice here and there. All these ways, all these teachings, they still carry a lot of beautiful wisdom that I have been exposed to, so much closer to heart. I think there was time for everything, and I certainly still carry that scrutiny and the need to get down to the bottom of things that probably will never leave me, and it's just part of my makeup and training. So that's what I've been applying in my inquiry. I wouldn't even call myself a researcher because that kind of suggests very academic approach. Just the woman who remembered, and I'm helping to remember other women and men.
Thank you so much for sharing. I feel like I have
Good
been
save.
down a bit of an Ola Wolny rabbit hole for quite a long time, and we've been talking about all the little things that I've picked up along the way, but it's really cool to just hear you say, being in a place for 15 years and then transitioning from that. And something that came up instantly was just that idea of how you have moved into this new way of older way of connecting back to self with, and when you said the remembering, like a woman that remembered, I feel like that kind of segued straight into that question we had, Matt, that we were talking about in terms of how you've utilized. So I'm just going to jump to number 3, but it's when you've moved. So you've moved to the land. Sorry, Matt. This is how I roll. But how you moved back to the land and connected to sort of the shamans, as you mentioned, but then how you've kind of been able to transmute that with all the ancient Gnostic texts and the mysticism, and how you have brought that into the way that you live your life today.
Yeah, just I was saying that it's a very, very good question, big question. So I would say that to a degree, back when all of that was happening, I was kind of walking blind, and I think that worked in my favor, because if I had been aware, if I had taken probably that kind of spiritual lens into it, I might have killed the process, which I know that from the perspective today. So I was pretty much walking kind of raw and naked into the terrain that I didn't recognize. I literally, when I say that I got kicked out of oil and gas, what I mean by that is that I almost the circumstances pretty much made me come up here, because I was living at the time in the south of Norway, working in oil and gas. I worked in oil and gas in the UK before. So I was almost the whole thing was orchestrated for me to move up north, and the minute I moved up here, the whole thing fell apart. So I got sort of into some complications on a work front, and as a result of that, pretty much that path that I was on for such a long time, everything that I knew, everything that I was trained to do, just collapsed. And the question was, so who am I, absent that status, absent that job title, absent all of that? And for a very long time, it was a path of me to find my own worth and my own sort of value beyond the matrix construct, right? Beyond what matrix tells us that we are worth and who we are, by identifying with the roles, with the functions, with the job descriptions, etc. So it kind of started, I didn't choose this, at that time. I was pushed into it. I was in a way ambushed. So I had no choice. I had no choice but to keep walking, and I was kind of walking blind, knowing that I just have to find something deeper, because the external structure just fell. It just collapsed, and that's how I got very much exposed at the time to the local people, to the local to the native population as well here. And that was absolutely life-changing for me at the time, also in a context that I didn't really have support in my very close circle, family, etc. I just had moved from the south to the north, so friends, that kind of friends circle, that I left that behind down south. So physically I was alone. My personal life was collapsing as well. I had no support. So suddenly I found support in people that I didn't even know. These were people that I just came across here as I moved. And it was extremely life-changing, to also see people that really believe in you, that kind of are not the immediate natural circle that should have your back, right? Because they just getting to know you, and suddenly you have all this support, and that was beautiful. They kind of introduced me into a bit of their ways, and how they live their life, and the values were totally different. I'm coming from Eastern Europe, because I'm originally from Poland. We kind of, I think, get very much especially my generation, we are the early 80s, so we are the children of the communism, and we very much were brought up with that inferiority syndrome. So when you go to the West, you kind of needing to prove yourself, right? So the values that are instilled into us are really, really kind of deep matrix. You're not worth anything, etc., unless you can prove your output. And suddenly I'm meeting people who don't care what I do and all that. They just care about the deeper aspects, within the person, and that's how they live. That's how they operate. They are much closer to the nature. They're much closer to the land. I mean, it was an amazing experience back then, especially when everything was for me pretty much, collapsing, and I didn't really know what to do with myself. And over time, I also got into some work with it was some research with a Polish astrologer at the time, and I was kind of looking that perhaps that's a way out into something. And to be fair, that was a very, very good experience in a sense of being exposed to a lot of the texts. That was the kind of introduction into the Gnostic texts, into the creation myths, into different types of mythologies. So that kind of how it all came together over a period of my withdrawal from what I used to know as a life with, in that matrix sense, life of worthiness, right? And now you're kind of left with nothing but time. So that's pretty much how that happened for me.
And then now with all of your kind of remembering aspects. So I love this idea. I've listened to quite a few of your interviews, but I'd love to kind of dig a little deeper in. You share a lot about how you got to this point where now, okay, so where we're at this point, you've studied with this astrologer, you now started to deep dive into all the texts to try and understand and uncover. And then I think you've shared too that then what came from there was the remembering, was the deeper self-exploration, or the deeper understanding of life itself, and where things, like how things have come to be.
Right. I would actually say that it was the other way around. So it was the exposure to the land. It was the time that I spent in absolute desperation, because I you cannot call it anything else when everything just fell apart. And I wasn't really seeking any spiritual insights necessarily at the time. It was just a time of being out there, sort of seeking freedom, seeking silence, grounding, just to be out of the four walls, and suddenly it kind of, as I discovered, is that the land, something out there is kind of making me pick up on things, making me remember certain things, or just making me aware of certain things that really did not come from any training, any books. It didn't come from education. And I started to look into that because, of course, still kind of infected with my engineering scientific mind, I had to investigate. And then I started finding literally confirmation of what I am in some way organically acquiring, remembering. Suddenly I find confirmation of these aspects out there in the ancient texts, in the Gnostic texts, for example. And suddenly I was able to interpret these stories, these texts, legends, etc., in a different light, not through the academic lens, not through the mainstream, even in the alternative context, not in that way, but in a way where everything comes beautifully together. And then I also came across the sort of deepening through the alchemical teachings, the feminine alchemical teachings, and that was just that was so natural, it wasn't like another notion, it wasn't another philosophy to explore. That was just back to the roots of who we are, going way beyond what the official narrative, even in that kind of pseudo awakened world, has been trying to push on us. And everything came beautifully together. And of course, at the same time, the whole astrology, numerology, was very present in my life, and I knew that there's something off here. That much I knew, because I always knew that there's something wrong if I can, using a mathematical code, decipher someone's life. That shouldn't happen. There's something off about it. It's, you know, if we are so unlimited and if we are so powerful, then how come our existence, our experience, and sort of future can be collapsed to some kind of mathematical code, which is actually quite narrow? As in, you know, I'm sorry, but it doesn't present you with the whole array of possibilities and unlimited sort of potential. It kind of very specifically distills it to whatever it is that specifically pertains to you. So I knew very, very quickly, very early on, that astrology is not a benevolent thing. The fact that something out there dictates our experience here, not a benevolent thing. But I just couldn't kind of yet work out at that point, you know, what is going on. And that in the end came thanks to digging into the Gnostic texts, digging into the Sumerian texts, the myths, etc. Because when you look at a lot of those things through that astrology, numerology lens, then the whole story comes together. And the Bible, of course, as well, right? I mean, they all pretty much explain the whole story. It's just a different geography, and it all came together, that we are dealing with an environment that's controlled. We are dealing with reality and our experience, which is not really our own choosing. It's very much a blend of you know, what we can do, the best we can do, with some kind of forces that are very much limiting and dictating that experience. So that's pretty much how it went for me.
Yeah, amazing.
Ola, can you tell us your experiences working with these practitioners, these shamans, and when you feel these ancient Gnostic texts, when they became kind of manipulated into what they read as today?
So you know, the unfortunate truth is that pretty much all texts have been manipulated. The Norse texts have been very heavily manipulated. All of them, they've been manipulated, and that kind of goes back to the times when they were written. First of all, in the feminine tradition, or in the indigenous traditions, there is very little written tradition. Things have been kept in oral tradition, so things have been passed down. That's very much the case in feminine mysteries. They were not written down specifically because there was this potential risk of corruption. So certain things were kind of tucked away into stories, fairy tales, legends, myths, etc., even though those, when they got written down, they got manipulated too. But when you look into the times when these texts were written, for example, the sagas, the Norse sagas, or it's pretty much, you can trace it back to any text. Those texts were not written by random people like today. Anybody can write a book, anybody can, you know, leave some kind of legacy in writing, right? And even that is censored, but still it's much more open. Back then you had to have kind of a sponsor, and that would have been somebody pretty high up in either in the ruling elites or in that kind of hierarchy, which means that there was a specific version of events, specific context that would have been captured. For example, the indigenous traditions here in the north, the capturing. So what we know from official narrative regarding shamanism, for example, comes from the Christian missionaries that came here. So you can imagine what we're dealing with, right? Looking at these shamans, thinking that they are the work of the devil, and they were the ones describing what these shamans were doing and what these rituals or ceremonies were about. And I, you know, of course, this is going to be absolutely an inaccurate version of anything. Not to mention that even when you're dealing with historians or anthropologists who happen to be studying certain indigenous tribes and watching the shamans, they also very often in their descriptions they miss the essence of these practices, and they only capture the theater around it. So then they bring that tradition back, right, to the West, or they sort of popularize that, and people start jumping on the bandwagon and starting to to pretend they're shamans just by following, you know, the recipe, whereas the essence of that is totally lost, because that's not what they were able to see. That's not what they understood. So for example, in the context of the Sami people, you know, the Sami people, the indigenous people of the north, very often even amongst them, it is very difficult to get to that original core teaching. They obviously they have their traditions and they have their history. You know, there's a very sort of dark side of the history of the Sami people, because there's been a process of Norwegianization. So especially here in Norway, they pretty much have been considered worse in a human evolution level. So they have been told that literally through their physical appearance and certain sort of biological aspects, they are not fully human. And you know, one must wonder if there is so much energy, so much effort that goes on over generations and generations and generations to make someone feel so belittled and so insignificant and to destroy their spirit, then who are they to begin with, right? What is it that they hold to begin with that is so dangerous, that is so inconvenient? I mean, you can, of course, you know, you guys are in Australia, and the same happens to the indigenous people out there, the same happens to indigenous people everywhere. And you know, we are all indigenous, right? We can be traced back to some indigenous history ourselves. It's that's we all are from somewhere. But specifically these people that held certain traditions, they held certain wisdom, and specifically the shamanic traditions, very dangerous establishment.
I feel like that I wonder if then do you think that we can find our way back, or you know, is this power over us too strong that the humans of today, we have no way of like overcoming or moving forth or finding the rise up that essentially needs to, I guess personally we feel, I mean, I speak for myself, but I think Matt, you're in that same category, that we're kind of digging down a deeper spiritual feeling, living, you know, I live closer to the land now, being I'm in the countryside, but I feel this connection deepening and strengthening, and through certain practices that I've like naturally gravitated towards, and then you affirmed for me, in terms of how I really focus on my bleed, and I focus on how I'm connecting to the earth during that time and the process of that, which we can dive into in a second. But do you believe, like, I think I've collected this from you, whether you believe this to be true or not, or whether this is something that you thought or were saying, but I believed that you shared that humans once were peace-loving, like deeply connected and rooted in the earth, and these humans of, you know, under that kind of the feminine alchemy idea, was known by women. And today, like most of the myths, most of the teachings and the tools have become kind of watered down, I would say, but they're still very, like from my perspective, they're really dark. And then so I just wonder if if that is just the twist, is that been the twist before that, when feminine alchemy was kind of moved on, or is this the, are we just looking at it from the wrong lens, or how have you kind of interpreted the darkness that is now, the myths that we are learning? You know, I have 3 young daughters, so I'm really into them understanding the process of living with their cycle, and living with the cycle of watching me cycle, and watching the earth be you know, cycle in itself, and the nature of, you know, flowers. We're very much into the garden, and we have, you know, we have each our individual garden that we care for, and then we've got our big family garden, and it's just, yeah, I find it really interesting. One aspect of this question is, can we overcome it? Like, are we doomed to like live under the powers that that are at play, or and then also bringing in that idea of like the mystery of the myths and how they are very dark. And, you know, I censor those I sort of have moved away from them naturally from my daughters, because I just feel like I don't know what I feel is, you know, what are they gaining from that story? What is the essence of that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that over millennia of the reign of these parasitic beings over this realm, over the earth, they have been very focused on making sure that they come across and they appear as very powerful compared to us, and certainly on that level of technological advancement, they are extremely advanced. So that's the, you know, what we are living in, what we are dealing with, as in the whole zodiac mechanism, right? The whole control of this realm. Absolutely, you know, you gotta give it to them, right? I mean, that's their making. The way they have organized this realm so that women's power could be suppressed, and they absolutely had to go after that. That's the alchemy that they had to. And by alchemy, of course, I don't mean any mushroom, I don't mean anything like that. Sometimes people don't understand when I talk about alchemy, and I don't talk about some kind of weird potions mixing and stuff like that. That's nonsense. But alchemy that is native to women through our hormonal system, through the chemistry of our body, and the physical and spiritual makeup that we happen to carry, because we were, as females are in this universe, created to carry certain sacred functions, and one of them is creation, not creativity but creation, and materialization of things into being. So these malevolent beings, they love to appear very powerful, but somehow they always fail to really touch, to really get all the way as deep as they would like to, in terms of control and in terms of switching off certain aspects within humans. So I like to always make that sort of bring up the Avatar, the movie, because to me Avatar is another documentary. Everybody's talking about The Matrix being a documentary. Avatar is another documentary, and the history of Avatar, the first part, I haven't even watched any other, but the first part, it pretty much describes what happened on Earth. And of course they flipped, because they like to flip things around, so they made humans into the hostile aggressors, and they made the blue people as the kind of helpless, you know, the ones being invaded. But if you flip it around, that's pretty much what happened here. So avatars, or the blue people, that is the story of the humans. That is the story of humans who were here living in communion with nature, living, you know, the whole notion of Ewa, the tree of life, right? Isn't it interesting that the tree of life and all these kind of spiritual, not just spiritual, but very much those certain kind of concepts and references are always made in these movies, because that's where the truth is hidden. So humans were very much connected in a way where they could function in communion with the upper kingdom, with the lower kingdom, and that was the true communion, and very benevolent, very spiritually connected, very advanced that way. Not so much technologically, right? I mean, let's face it, technologically we are nowhere near where they are. So to answer your question, is it too late, or are they too strong? Are they too powerful? Well, the good news is that we are living in the times of the end of the world, and the true meaning of the end of the world, and the apocalypse, the revelation, the Ragnarok, the end, the doom of the gods, the doom. So this is the time. We are now living in the end times, and the end times refer to the reign of them over this realm, over us. And this is not to say that we are just to sit back and do nothing, because very much the prophecies, the apocalypse, etc., the mythology, that the end of the day, end of days mythologies are talking about very much our sort of us taking action and our role in the unfolding of what's happening. It is the only difference is that the end of the world, effectively, in terms of the placement on the timeline, describes the fact that right now we have entered time, 2017, where there are certain celestial and earthly sort of energetic contexts where those have never happened in the past, and that's what the apocalypse explicitly talks about. That's what the Indigenous people, the Hopi prophecies, the Lakota people prophecies, they all talk about the same sort of events, right? And they talk very clearly about humanity, all of them. The Judgment Day, the fact that not everybody will survive, the two paths that are diverging, so humanity need to choose. So we know that there will come a point, and it is already now, where, is there something to do? Are they too powerful? They're not. Absolutely, they're not. They're not too powerful. This is the trick that they have played. So we have actually been fascinating them over millennia, because they have been playing with our DNA. They have been doing interventions into our DNA to shut it down on so many levels. This is why we carry so much of what so-called junk DNA. So they've done so many interventions into our DNA, and they still cannot quite grasp, that they still cannot claim that full control. So they're still trying, they're still going at it, and they still cannot touch that divine aspect within humans, especially within women. So I think good news is that absolutely we are more powerful than they are, even though we are not fighting in that technology space with them. We are sort of, the battle is on a totally different level. But I think what needs to be said is that, there is a lot of very subtle aspects to the battle. It's not about what's out there, what's in the media. That's just one layer, and of course, we don't. I'm not even gonna go into that, because that's just destruction. But there are much more subtle levels of people being caught up in the matrix with having best intentions. I'm talking about people who consider themselves awakening, who consider themselves spiritual or aware. There is unfortunately plenty of people who have fell into the New Age, who have been infected with certain New Age, because New Age has been invented basically by, it's a CIA movement, right, to capture people who started waking up at some point in the 80s, 90s, to redirect them from religion into something, some kind of spirituality. So then, we got all these kind of women's circles and the moon worship and women who think they are special and all that kind of stuff, when actually all that is deception. So that's another, that's, the deception is on so many levels. I call it the chess game, but Because I call it the chess game, because literally wherever you go, you know, whether it's a Masonic lodge or a church, you know, the floor is black and white, right? Nothing in this matrix is black and white apart from the floor. So that tells us we're in a game. We're in a game. We're on a like a chessboard, and that chessboard has multi layers. It happens on so many levels. It's not only whether people know that, you know, COVID was a scam, whether people know that they shouldn't have taken the jab, whether people know about these things. This is one level. I think that much more evil game is playing out at that level where people think they are awakened without actually knowing how corrupt they are.
It's that. So like I guess you're speaking to me about me in a sense. Like I think and I'm so open to it all. It's kind of, I've definitely felt there's been a movement for me in terms of the way that, you know, stepping away from what the system wanted us to do. So there was this pressure to be a certain way. So for me, I'd never felt right to birth within a hospital because that's where you go when you're sick. So I chose to birth at home. I then did a lot of my studies is in postpartum support. So it was very big for me to be supported at home by the women and by my friends and family. So over the last 6 years since I've had my 3 children, it's been very big to like bring in these feminine connections. So it is, and then just so like you just kind of dance in this realm, and then all of a sudden there's this big moon that comes once a month and we all bleed on the moon. So it's like, well, that's the thing that we should connect to. And obviously I've listened to and like a good chunk of things and what you've shared about, and in terms of I've listened to a lot of what you have spoken to in terms of like the moon itself being the satellite, and I think we had a good question about that, so I might find it. So I've heard you and other sources talk about it refer to the moon as more of a satellite placed here to manipulate humans, especially women, and our cycles. So can you share a few more thoughts on that? And I did have this idea that the potential, and I don't know if you read the message, the questions, but in terms of the potential that maybe we're bleeding more often so that we can actually cleanse more people around us, so we have the potential to overcome, or if this might be one of those subtle aspects, I don't know.
Well, I think we have to look into the moon and you know, again, this whole new age narrative, right? Like where is it even, where is this whole worship of the moon coming from? Because it is not coming from your grandmother and your mother and your great grandmother teaching you that. It's coming from online trends. It's coming from, you know, somewhere at some point there is this notion of moon and women, which is created artificially. Actually, when you look into the native teachings from a lot of countries, it's not. I like to refer to the Norse because they just very uncanny. They're beautiful. They're very broad. They show you so many things, but it's not just the moon. It's not just the north, but the moon.
I'm from the north, so thank you.
Right. So the moon,
Yeah.
the moon in those indigenous teachings, the moon even in when you look to the mythology, to the myths, the moon is first of all not feminine; it's masculine, and it's never benevolent. The moon, you know, here in the Norse tradition, for example, in the Sami people tradition, they shelter from the moon. You know, the rain, like for example, you've seen definitely those pictures of reindeer with the Santa Claus, right? And kind of behind it the whole disk of the moon, right? I mean, that's when Christmas comes, people have that in their houses, right? And the funny thing is that when you dig a little bit into that whole meaning, like why reindeer? Why reindeer is the animal, for example, of the Sami people? What is so special? Because it's not just an animal that sustains life. It's for them, right? It's a very sacred animal. And if you dig deeper, you find out that reindeers were believed to be protecting from the moon's influence. So this whole notion of reindeers pulling the sledge across the moon, right, as in front of the moon disk, it is to kind of separate, it is to protect from the moon influence, from the moonlight. And you know, even when you look to the terminology, the lunatic, right? I mean, that's not a good term. And lunatic, right? That's the effect of describing the effect of the moon. When you look through the science lens, the moon is just too perfect in terms of how it's positioned and the diameter and all those aspects when it comes to the sun and the eclipses, how perfect they align. That's not a natural satellite, right? So when you go down that path, and you also go back to the history, there was a time in history that myths talk about, the fairy tales talk about, that the moon was not up there in the sky. The myths talk about moon being fashioned in the sky by the gods. So I mean, we know that this is not, we know that from the Gnostic texts, we know that from mythology, the moon gets placed by the gods. So if it gets placed there by the gods, it doesn't get placed there for a good reason. It gets placed there so that they can control us. So there is no point really looking for benevolent effect of the moon on women or our link to that. You know, think about it, right? If everything that actually works against matrix is censored and is being kind of pushed down, you know, it doesn't get very much sort of coverage, or it doesn't get promoted, then why the whole moon narrative and women and the moon and all that, why is that so heavily promoted? And it's very much promoted in the New Age circles, right? Because it doesn't serve anything positive. It hooks women to something very artificial, something created by the gods that is absolutely not working in our favor. You know, the gods don't want us to be transmuting. That's why they fashioned the moon to actually imitate Venus, because Venus used to be linked to feminine mysteries, not the moon. The moon started acting and mimicking Venus in her behavior, but nobody even knows about it. You know, why women don't know about Venus? I'm not talking about worshipping Venus, because the whole notion of worship of anything, that's absolutely against any alchemical teachings. Women should not worship anything other than the temple of their own body if they want to, or perhaps just treat it with reverence, but definitely nothing external. Humans should not be worshipping anything external. So the moon is not really playing any benevolent part. You know, it destroys the essence of menstrual blood. It doesn't cause you to bleed. We are as in, it doesn't cause you to bleed more often because it's a benevolent thing. It's, you know, no other species out there are so out of any kind of tune regarding their own control over when they can get pregnant and when not, as women, as we are. You know, every other species, when they are in heat, that's when they get pregnant. So it's very clear. But for us women, it's flipped on its head. So you know, that kind of control over our own fertility is taken out of our hands. It's not as clear as for other species in nature, and the fact that the woman is available basically 13 times a year to fall pregnant without really having full control over that. You know, we've accepted that as nature. That's not nature. You know, back in the day, when you go back, ancient texts talk about it, but we don't have to go even that far. Women were able to control their own cycles, so they wouldn't bleed 13 times. They would bleed when they chose to bleed. And back in the day, the ancient texts talk about, for example, Mary Magdalene, Jesus, that the woman would bleed once a year, and she would choose when to bleed, and that was the time when she knew that she could get actually pregnant. So everything has been flipped on its head. Everything has been sort of reversed. And when you look into it a little bit deeper than that kind of surface level narrative, because of course women are looking for some kind of sense of belonging and this kind of let's come together, do something together, and it has been pushed very heavily that the moon is connected to the feminine, but that's a deception. That's not true. It's not rooted in history. It's not rooted in any indigenous accounts. It's not rooted in anything that's actually dates back beyond what's being pushed on us recently. So that's where
So
my clarification regarding the moon always comes from, that women be very, very cautious about what they truly believe and where is that coming from.
yeah, I think I've definitely delved a lot into different frameworks and human design and astrology and um, gene keys and all of these, like you, as you shared, are these like mathematic coding that's kind of giving us this framework that we can live from and move forward with. And I think there's this idea that feels really like it does become a little bit frantic because you end up, I notice now, there's a new moon today, which I think is very interesting that we happen to align that. I had no idea that this was that day, but it's just funny. But it also is very interesting because it does activate, well, the idea and the teachings, as you know, is in the moon is kind of our emotional body. And so it does activate that chaos, that lunatic aspect. And it's so yeah, it's been interesting because since I heard you share this, I sort of went down a rabbit hole of Venus and how can I connect more to my Venus and what Venus is doing and how that might be drawing me forward or backwards or but it is I think something that I was really interested in is from your practice of alchemical practice and how it interests me to understand like what is it that you do, like what is it that you do to connect to that feminine alchemy.
So I think I was just making notes as you were speaking so that I don't miss anything. I think I have to kind of debunk a few things there because um, you know, the moon being connected to emotional body, again, that's what we've been told, because the moon absolutely influences us, and that's why a lot of people, I mean, honestly, I don't know if it's a new moon right now. I don't care. I don't know when the full moon is. I'm not tracking any of that. I don't react to full moon, and I strongly recommend that people stop tracking that because it's not very good. It has control over you as long as you continue to give it power. Um, it's but yes, out there, of course, there is a reason why those indigenous people were, even creating amulets, etc., to protect from the light of the moon, from the influence of the moon, etc. So the emotional body is a bit of a flipped concept, as in it tries to affect you, but it is not an indigenous sort of, it's not a native function that moon equals emotions. No, it is trying to destabilize you, it is trying to influence you. So it's kind of this way around. And regarding Venus, again, it's not about Venus in the chart. You don't connect to Venus in the chart. Like, forget the chart, forget astrology, forget numerology, right? Because these are this is just the code of this matrix, and Venus tells us a lot of things. In the chart, if that's how you sort of read her, but in the context of alchemy, we're literally talking about the Venus in the sky. So it's I get that question often, right? Like, how do you connect? How do you, as if there was something that needs to be specifically done, and then you're there. Where actually we're talking about our natural state, and our natural state, that kind of core of us as women, as humans, is within us. The problem is we get in a way of that with all the overlays, with all the programming, conditioning, with our beliefs, with what we think we should be doing. So it's actually quite funny that it's not what you need to be doing to connect, it's what you need to stop doing so that you can fall back onto that natural kind of state of being, you know. And alchemical practice, there is no alchemical practice, you know. For example, a woman who bleeds, right? There is no alchemical practice. That just happens. That's your biology. That's your alchemy, that you bleed. The fact that you get pregnant and that child grows inside of a woman and is connected by umbilical cord, and you know that kind of magic happens by itself, that this child is maintained, it's sustained, it's being nourished, it's being fed, it's being taken care of, right? Whatever needs to be evacuated, some toxins, etc. That communication between mother's body and the child's just happens automatically. There is no practice around it. There is no, that's the problem. That's new age, you know. In alchemy there is no practice. A woman needs to literally take off all these cloaks, all these conditioning roles, masks, etc., to drop just into her own being, you know, without sort of needing to feel like if she does a backflip, if she does you know, a meditation in the morning, then she's in alchemy. It doesn't work like that. It works the opposite way, actually. It's very much about just taking off all those layers, all those beliefs that are not ours. So because that's the programming of the matrix, you know. That's what I'm saying. That I would argue that people who are in some kind of level of spirituality are caught into probably a bigger matrix than the people that have no idea what the hell is going on, because you know that's a different story. But I think the dangerous part is that people who think that they are awakened, right? There are so many traps for us. There's so much destruction in all sorts of forms and shapes, right? It's in the shape of going down and doing endless research, you know, digging into, is Earth flat or this or that or whatever, and it's just distracts you, especially for women, because men operate a little bit differently and our functions are different. But especially women, if they keep going down all these routes, and especially if it kind of creates certain sensations in their body, because alchemy goes down to hormones and hormones secretions. So if a woman operates from a state of fear, anxiety, frustration, anger, disappointment, all these kind of low vibrational feelings, there's no alchemy that's going to happen. If she's caught up in mind-based concepts, you know, God, some kind of spiritual developments and all that kind of stuff, you know, rituals and stuff like that, there's no alchemy, because she doesn't even know that she's caught up in the game of the gods. So that's what I'm saying. It's, I would say, unpeel yourself, you know. It's a stop doing. You don't have to worry about what you need to start doing and add layers to some kind of practice, when the problem is that we are so kind of caught up in things that are keeping us away from that alchemy, which is our birthright. It's natural, you know. You don't have to do any practice, right, in order to bleed, or in order to be pregnant or deliver that child. Your body will do the job, because that's part of the alchemy. As it happens, that spectrum of abilities is much wider, but we don't have access to it when we are wrapped in all that mind-based and other programming, right? So to get access to that whole spectrum, we don't actually have to do anything, because it is written as part of our makeup. It's a natural process. It's just that it's been kind of suppressed because of what we have been pulled into, and the behaviors that and the programming and the conditioning on all levels. So it's kind of, you know, it sounds more simple, but it's probably more difficult to really follow.
I think listening to you, I'm like, okay, cool, do less. Okay. And then I'm like, but like, so part of me is feeling like, okay, just live more biologically, live with the land, live and move with the seasons of the life around me. Uh, but then there's also an aspect of that that's like, oh yeah, well, I think this is where the biohacking comes in, and this is why people are like, I mean, from your perspective, absolutely, it's because the gods and the kind of yeah, the people that are controlling us are here to keep us small and keep us not actually understanding the function and the natural function of our alchemy. But there's a part of me that's like, the reason why I have sought more information is because I can feel this sense that things feel off. And so I'm trying to find a information that helps guide me back, essentially.
Hmm. Yeah.
But I
Yeah,
think
and
what you're sharing is that you will be guided back if you
well,
surrender.
I'm sharing what I'm trying to make women understand is that because you see a lot of women that I have contact with, they are caught in that endless cycle of searching, digging, spiritual development. What is even spiritual development? What do you have to develop into? You actually have to you have to get back to the core. You don't need to develop into anything. You have to strip of whatever false you have been wrapped into. And when you strip, you start touching the core, so something real starts again to flow through you. I love the Gnostics when the Gnostics talk about it, because the Gnostics talk about something that's totally misunderstood, and the New Age has butchered that whole concept, which is the death of ego. um, so the death of ego has been misunderstood and misinterpreted as something to do with personality. So death of ego means that now you don't have a personality, you're just this amoeba floating around, in love and light. That's not true. That's a total misunderstanding of the teaching. So the Gnostic ego, as they what they meant underneath that umbrella was the matrix infestation, was the matrix programming within us, was the overlays, was the kind of following of the false things, being involved in the false things, the masks, the titles, the roles, the everything that the matrix kind of keeps you hooked with. And that also goes, obviously, religions, spiritual paths, and weird kind of practices, etc. So not going back to that self, but following some kind of concepts, etc., that doesn't have to be just religion. So what they meant is that when that ego dies, that ego needs to die, as in those programs, that matrix infestation within you, it needs to be removed, it needs to be extracted, because once it's extracted, you start feeling the fire. That's the Gnostic fire. The Gnostic fire is that truth that burns through you, and that's the kind of signal, that's that connection. That's when you are back connected as a tree of life. When you're back connected as a tree of life, your alchemy, right, that kind of capacity of alchemy and of these functions of our body expands. So our DNA comes back online, even though we're told that it's all junk. It's not. So we can, because that's where it's all, these functions are written in our DNA. It's just that they're dormant. So if you can bring them up online, naturally your hormonal system, right, our hormonal system also expands, as in the capacity, the functions that our body is already naturally designed to perform, they come back online, they sort of awaken within a woman. And it's not a matter of choice, hope, intention, or some practice. It's literally a matter of removing what's blocking it. And what's blocking it is that matrix infestation, that matrix architecture within us, which the Gnostics referred to as the ego. So this is why I'm saying it's literally as simple as unpeel the layers. And by unpeel, I don't mean use some weird techniques that you will be doing till you're 90, unpeeling layer by layer, because that's also a mind approach. But that's the path. The path is not through some kind of initiations or through some kind of practices, etc. It's literally removing that infestation within, so that the real, the truth, you can be connected in a real way again. So the connection is not something that we seek out of will, out of intention. It's literally there. It's already there. You're gonna get in contact with it when you strip.
Ola, I have a very serious question for you, so you better sit down for this one. Are you ready?
I don't know about that one then.
Fair enough. What's your perspective on the pyramids, and how/why were they built? Go.
So I think I would like to first of all expand on the whole notion of pyramids, that they are not obviously only in Egypt, or not only in Mexico, or some of the sites that we know about officially. There are plenty of pyramids all over the world, plenty of them under the sea level, so we don't sort of normally see them. There are pyramids here where I live, and I think nobody's talking about it. These are one of the oldest pyramids, Lofoten, this area where I live. Quite an interesting geology, as understood by the mainstream science, because Lofoten, this area, has the oldest and the youngest, in one place, rock formations in the world. So one might ask, what are the oldest and what are the youngest? Like, what are these things, right? Because normally you would have either the old ones, or it would be consistency. But here you have a mix. So the pyramids are also here, and obviously you can see them. They do not look as perfect as the ones in Giza or the ones in Egypt, because these ones are fairly new. These ones here are much older, so the process of erosion, the process of them kind of losing that perfect shape has already been very advanced. And from the alchemical perspective, or the kind of the teachings, that oral tradition teachings, the pyramids have been part of the architecture placed by the gods, by the archons here on earth, to, in a way, it's part of that technology to sort of control the grid, to keep the energy that naturally should be flowing from the underworld, from sort of beneath the earth, from the earth womb up to the middle world. So they kind of clog that up. This is part of that architecture, but also they are it's part of the architecture to anchor the firmament.
What would you say about the pyramids in what are they called? I'm having an absolute
in
brain
Egypt.
fart. Egypt.
Well, I mean, I would say the same. I was quite lucky to go to the Great Pyramid last year, and I have never felt that sick inside of a place. I mean, sick as in, it just felt extremely technological. It just the pyramid is not active. It's not serving. They don't serve the function, because the pretty much that all that matrix infrastructure was switched off in 2017. This is not my sort of idea, but this is in line with the apocalypse. So basically, when the moon loses its grip on a woman, when the architecture of the matrix, right? It's also the Ragnarok. Ragnarok talks about it as well, that the serpent that's holding this world together suddenly either bites through its tail or just lets go. So the zodiac wheel, all that's kind of holding it up there, the moon, etc. That architecture has been switched off. But well, I've been to the Great Pyramid, and of course the others standing nearby. It's quite a lot of them out there. I personally, I felt quite bad. It's inside of it. It feels very technological. It feels like you're entering a spaceship, kind of, you know, which is just ancient spaceship type of thing. I don't think they were spaceships, but I do think that there was technology, of course, around them that's probably so advanced that I cannot even fathom to explain, imagine. And yeah, that's my experience.
Did you have an opinion or an idea of why they're
In
there in the
Egypt?
first place?
Well, they
Yeah.
are all over the place. They're not just in Egypt, right? Egypt happened to
Yeah,
be.
yeah.
Egypt is quite an interesting place. You know, if you ever take a flight into Cairo, maybe Cairo is kind of just at the start of it, but maybe if you fly to Hurghada or Marsalam as a tourist, so it's a little bit further. You know, the whole Sahara Desert, right? The whole desert. If you actually look at it from above, and I was lucky to be driving through it a little bit as well. It doesn't really look like a desert. It looks like something blew up there. And just the whole terrain was wiped out. So to me, you know, the presence of all these temples, the fact that and by the way, right, alchemy, the word alchemy comes from Egyptian alcheme, and chem, and that's Egyptian, and chem means black, and chem, and the specifically the way the fertility of the land was perceived in Egypt, right? Something very special down in Egypt. I strongly believe that, you know, there were certain places, certain sites of interest, of bigger interest for them, for the gods, that they were trying to get to that energy in the underworld. They were trying to suppress it really, really hard. Such places are here up north as well. That's why they have the pyramids here as well, even though, I mean, I can, you know, I'll be happy to share pictures of that so that you can see that they really, really look like pyramids. And when you come here and you see them, I mean, it is what it is. But I strongly believe that this was to do with you know, these places, the temples alongside Nile. If you go and check them out, a lot of them were places of original reverence to the feminine, reverence to the goddess, so called, but to the feminine, and right there, you know, where all that kind of fertility, alchemy, creation place was sort of that's where all that alchemical aspect was very, very strong. You find the pyramids right nearby. You find all these kind of masculine or should we say patriarchal kind of imprints, right? The monuments, etc. So it's something about suppression of that, because you have all these chambers in those temples that, well, if you look at them through the lens of alchemy, these chambers are not accidental. They are there specifically linked to feminine mysteries. Yeah, and very strong presence of that archontic, suppressive artifacts on purpose.
So Ulla, what do you feel like? What is what are we? If this is what my reality looks like now, as I, you know, as people do the work to kind of overcome the evil that has been placed here, what are we going to look like? What's the world going to look like, or what did it look like back before? Like, how did the day-to-day look, or how did the human act and look?
Well, I don't know what it will look like. That's just speculation. You know, I can go by the prophecies that like I say, they talk about two paths for humanity. One that leads to absolute demise, and one that leads to a life in abundance and kind of golden age. And the same Norse mythology, for example, talks about the fact that the final battle between the gods and the Titans, the Titans, the giants, the Jotun, right? And that battle, some of the giants die, the gods die, some of the giants survive, but who survives as well in terms of humans? Because not everybody survives. This is another, I think, a new age kind of flavor imposed, that everybody's going to wake up. There's this mass awakening. There isn't a mass awakening, and neither that was ever prophesied, because this whole notion of separating wheat from the chaffs, that's been mentioned in the Gospels, and the Judgment Day is talking about separation. It's talking about the two paths. It's talking specifically that not everybody will be on the same path, and not everybody will wake up, or however we call it, and join, the sort of the make the right choices. No, because it's not about choices. The Judgment Day, all that aspect is not about a choice. It's not about what you want. It's not about the intention. It's literally, people are going to be evaluated by the level of that matrix infestation. So that's what's the Judgment Day is about. And the Norse mythology is talking about that people that will survive Ragnarok are those that hid or slept under the tree of life. So that's very telling, right? Specifically, there are people who are connected again, who are under the tree of life, not by intention, but by what the sort of architecture that they carry. So and they will repopulate the world. So I imagine that that's another kind of version of like a golden age. The best I can say, we've already had golden age here on Earth. We had the time prior to the matrix and the astrology, etc., where humans were living in a totally different way. But of course, as long as a woman is in her alchemy, the gods couldn't roll out their plan of hegemony over this realm. So the whole notion of land and milk and honey that kind of shows up in some myths or in fairy tales, the horn of plenty, these kind of references, they talk about a way of living which was very much, that kind of takes us back to that fertility that woman stands for, right? The fertility brought upon the land by a woman, by what flows through the woman, because we as women, we are mothers, not just children, physical children, but we are mothers, as in we are the one who materialize into this reality. We are connected to the field of unlimited potential, and we materialize into this reality. We literally birth realities, and men are experiencing, so we kind of midwife reality into being, and men experience that thanks to the consort, thanks to the woman. That's our function in the society, that's our function in a world. It's just that we, because of the moon and because of all those control mechanisms, we have been for a very, very long time kind of caught and reduced to creating reality out of very low energies. And when women are kept in those low energies, guilt, shame, fear, etc., survival, then what they are creating is obviously not going to be high output, right? It's going to be what it is. That's how they used us. That's how they use us. This is why they came after women. This is why it was so important for them to demoralize and suppress the feminine.
Gosh, it feels like there's, it's just like another language, which is really interesting. And I guess it brings us back. We speak a lot about the, I guess the onion, the layers and layers that you're going to work on to your 90 that you shared. And then that's all up here in your mind. And then it's the layers of the physical kind of, or maybe not even physical, but the deeper layers of just like kind of surrendering maybe, or, unwinding all of these things, because like you said, My mother, grandmother, and great grandmother weren't considering the moon, but they weren't considering anything. They were also very much, they to me were like completely driven by, well, my great grandmother was driven by war. So the war that then propelled her to do the things that she did, which parented in a certain way. And I guess as I have three little kids now. It's this idea of how I am mothering them and how I can, you know, obviously that's the role that I find as a mother is I'm finding as much information as I can to be able to pass that on to my children so that they can flourish in whatever world that be. But yeah, it's I think there was something to that. I mean, maybe you can just jump in and say what comes to your mind as I've shared that. But there's something in the way that we have, I've done a lot of the self-help work, which I've heard you speak to and say that's not that, that's going to be never-ending saga. But it's also, if we're being kind of held down and the vibration of the earth is being plugged and we kind of have to somehow break through that to kind of overpower or override this kind of what we may call evil. There's something that I'm trying
Yeah,
to.
I get what you're saying. So back to what you kind of where you came from, that in your family those traditions didn't really exist or they didn't run. They kind of were more focused on survival, which I think is pretty much the case for, when we go back those generations, right? I mean, it's not. Those teachings are not that often there. Certainly where I'm from, and in my family, my grandmother, there was some echo of that there, especially in that kind of maybe context of nature, but in Eastern Europe, back when I was a child, women would still, like older women, they would, for example, wear a scarf on their hair, and that was not some kind of token of hiding thinning hair or anything like that. It was actually because they knew that they were collecting energy, and then they were kind of storing that energy from the stars, from Venus as well in their hair. So that was a totally understood sort of aspect and tradition. I think that the West has lost some of it probably earlier than we have. So as in the East, going back to the times of war, there are stories that talk about in Poland or in that kind of Eastern bloc, that there were women who, when the men were sent to war and the women stayed behind with children, taking care of the farms, taking care of the whatever they owned, the assets, there was nowhere to go to buy anything, right? So you were living off your land, you were living off whatever you could plant and grow and sow, and somehow the food was never missing. Somehow the abundance was always there, and that was sort of delivered or secured through that alchemy. So these women, even though they were absolutely living in times of great despair, and they were, they've lost their husbands, they've lost the men left, these women still were able to take care. And we have stories that those women that kind of were in that alchemical element, somehow the armies, the enemy armies, were passing 5 kilometers to the west or to the east, but not quite where they lived, or the bombs were flying but not quite landing and destroying their houses. So coincidence, a lot of coincidences. So I think that that tradition and that it kind of depends where you're from. You can still see that, you can still find that. It was present. Certainly, I know of stories and accounts from Eastern Europe that even up until the 80s, 90s were quite common knowledge, but I guess later it just became a little bit, kind of went under the radar. It people didn't speak about it so openly. But back to what you've asked, like, so what can we do? Well, again, it's part of the programming that there's something specific that we need to do rather than stop doing, because actually the issue with why is it not online, why is it not activating, it's not a sort of a result of us not doing, not following a recipe, but it's a result of that infestation. It's a result of overlays, of beliefs, of false beliefs, of things that we might consider benevolent, but they are actually coming from the matrix. Plenty of women who talk about spiritual development. A woman, there's nothing to develop into. A woman should actually kind of go deeper in, not out there into spiritual developments, following some weird practices or following some techniques and endless healings and stuff like that, when actually our DNA already has all the codes for regeneration, right? I mean, back to those stories from Eastern Europe, back until the 60s, 70s, there were women living in the Eastern Bloc, because part of the alchemy, right? When alchemy is there, a woman doesn't really age, or she kind of, those women would look much better than what the number, the number was saying. So these women very often would have to flee. They would have to move the village that they lived their whole life in. Let's say when they got to the age of 40, 50, they would have to move, because it was starting to look a little bit weird that the people living nearby, they knew that this woman must be 50, she must be 40, but she looks so good, what's going on? So of course, when it kind of came to well, not everyone is that lucky, right? They had to escape, and they would move deeper into Russia. They would move to Siberia. They would move to certain places where they would not be recognized and they couldn't be tracked and traced, and they started a new life. So these are not sort of random stories. That's how it used to be. I'm not saying that this is the story of every single woman out there, because it isn't. Because
what do you mean?
What I mean that not every woman is in her alchemy. Alchemy, unfortunately, because of the infestation that's been happening, is kind of available to a woman, but if she is truly in that alchemy, that's another story, and that's for every woman to sort of evaluate for herself. But like I say, in the past, there were plenty of women who unfortunately did not have that kind of capacity, and some did, but it all depended on how they lived their life, right, and all that kind of alchemical aspects. But it wasn't choices.
Now, I'm not judging. I can tell you I have 4 older sisters, and I can agree with Ola. It doesn't happen to everyone. I'm just going to say that. That's all I'm going to say with that. Take what you will. Take what you will. Ola, I've got one question for you. We haven't sent it to you. I just thought of it. If you were to die tomorrow, what would your last message to humanity be?
Wow.
Good sigh. Good sigh. That is the correct response.
Yeah, that's a response that confirms I did not see that question before, right? Well,
You're welcome.
I think that my message would be the same as it is if I would not die tomorrow. because it is a message full of hope, but it's a message also that needs to be grounded in something real, which is we are living in the end times, and the end times are to be understood as the end of the reign of these beings over this realm. But we have a role to play in this. We absolutely have the power, absolutely have the power. The fact that they are more powerful, that's an illusion, that's a trick, that, you know, they're using very advanced technology to trick us into believing that we do not stand a chance. We absolutely do. We fascinate them and enrage them with the power that we have. And this is right now the time for, you know, to get real. But getting real means not actually necessarily digging through, you know, 100 new rabbit holes, because there is no point of knowledge saturation that is going to make you free. It's not that. It's actually the fact that you become unavailable to this matrix programming. You become unavailable to respond to the hooks and the triggers from the matrix. And that is going to be the game changer. So the Judgment Day is not a bad thing, but it is, in a way, you know, it's going to be real. It's going to separate those that are still infected, whether that be through, you know, the typical kind of matrix, lack of awareness, etc., or whether that is through believing certain things that are just not real either. But it's kind of, it's happening. It is I think very, very good time to be alive. And you know, just go back to yourself, like ask yourself the things that you follow, the practices that you follow, how do you know about them? Like why do you follow them? Is it because, you know, where do you know about them? Why that? How do you truly feel? You know, like, step away. If you were to disconnect from the internet, what would you do? What would your life look like? And perhaps there is some kind of genius in simplicity. Perhaps there is what we need to do is do less, not more. Maybe that's where the true answer is hidden.
Really appreciate them.
Wise words. So Ola, feel free to share any final comments, resources or contact information or services that you offer as we close out the podcast.
So if anybody wants to dive a little bit deeper into anything that I've shared and more, so much more, have a look at my website, selfmasteryquest.com. I have recorded several webinars where pretty much they, I think, sum up and dive deep into everything that I ever can touch on in those kind of environments. Of course, there's only so much that we can go into. So whether you want to dig into the DNA, into the alchemy much deeper, or into the zodiac mysteries and how all that is hanging together and how is that affecting us, I have some content on all those things. Other than that, I have consultations, so you can speak to me one-on-one as well, and that includes consultations around feminine alchemy, as well as consultations on the matrix code, so astrology, numerology. And finally, I think the thing that gives me probably the most pleasure is meeting people face to face, meeting people in groups or individually through my events, my getaways in the Arctic. And now I have opened up Madeira as well, where I literally started working with that elimination of matrix infestation. So it's not really me that's you know, doing so much as I can apply pressure, but it is the terrain, it is the nature that does the job. And that's probably back to what you've mentioned, what you've asked before, what would be my message to humanity: get out of this AI controlled world. Go to nature, be more out there, but be available without expectation, be available without trying to spiritualize it. Just be out there, let the nature, let the terrain hit you, because that is what the indigenous people knew, that out in the nature, the contact with this raw terrain that's uninfected, because it doesn't have the mind, right? It's uninfected with this matrix code. It can literally reset you. It can do that to you if you don't try looking for some kind of breakthroughs and some kind of don't go there with some special intentions. Just make yourself available. Just go and spend time in the nature. This is why they are doing everything to keep us in. Everything is now online. Everything is so available. The 15-minute cities, the digital ID, etc. Everything is obviously heading in the opposite direction. So just rule of thumb: always do the opposite. And the nature is truly where, surprisingly, you can fix most of your issues without even needing any therapies or modalities, etc. So that's one of the simplest secrets of these teachings. And of course it's very underwhelming, because you cannot monetize it. Nobody's gonna make money on telling you to go to the nature, but that's exactly what's needed.
I'll have to find a way to get Nuala.
I'm living in the nature.
Anywhere out there, right?
I'm in the nature, mate. I'm healed. Look at me. I'm alchemized. You, on the other hand. Oh, Ola, it's been so wonderful to speak to you and really pull even more from your brain. It's felt, it's really mind-boggling, but there's such a joy. I feel like there's such a joy that you're exuding so much positivity in that there is a process that's outside, and that, I really feel that from you, and I'm really grateful that we had this conversation. So thank you for your time.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And
thank you so much.
My internet is like crackly, so I don't know if I can.
Nuala's internet is absolutely terrible. This is why this is always so hard, Ola. Welcome to my world. But I'm a trooper. We battle on. But I appreciate your time, Ola. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. All the best to everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.